Have you ever felt like your life was shattered, like everything you once depended on was suddenly gone? What if I told you that in the middle of loss, pain, and uncertainty, there is a story in the Bible that teaches us the incredible power of faithfulness and reveals how God can use even the smallest decisions to shape a greater purpose? Today, we're going to explore the story of Ruth, a woman whose loyalty, humility, and courage changed the course of history. This is not just an ancient tale. It's a roadmap for anyone searching for meaning, for purpose, and for the assurance that God sees and rewards the faithful heart. The story of Ruth begins in the time of the Judges, a period in Israel's history marked by instability, corruption, and spiritual wandering. It was a time when everyone did what was right in their own eyes. And in this turbulent backdrop, we meet a family from Bethlehem, Elimelech, his wife Naomi, and their 2 sons. Because of a severe famine in the land, they leave Bethlehem and move to Moab, a foreign country. Imagine their situation, leaving behind everything familiar, driven only by survival. It's a decision of desperation, not abundance, but tragedy strikes. First, Naomi's husband Elimelech dies. Then, her 2 sons marry Moabite women, Orpah and Ruth. For a moment, it seems life might stabilize. But after 10 years, both of Naomi's sons die as well. Now Naomi is left with no husband, no sons, and no security. In her culture, this meant not only grief, but also extreme vulnerability. Naomi hears that the famine in Israel is over, and she decides to return home. She urges her 2 daughters-in-law to remain in Moab, to remarry, and to rebuild their lives. Orpah, with tears, eventually agrees and stays behind. But Ruth makes a choice that will echo for generations. Ruth clings to Naomi and declares some of the most powerful words in the Old Testament. "Where you go, I will go, and where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried." This is more than family loyalty. It is a declaration of faith. Ruth, a Moabite, is leaving behind her homeland, her gods, her culture, everything she knows, to follow Naomi and embrace the God of Israel. This decision marks the beginning of Ruth's transformation. And here lies our first lesson. Faithfulness often requires sacrifice. It's choosing commitment even when the easier path is to turn back. Ruth didn't know what awaited her in Bethlehem. She had no guarantees. But her loyalty to Naomi and her openness to God set her on a path toward purpose. When Naomi and Ruth arrive in Bethlehem, the entire town stirs with whispers. Naomi, bitter and broken, tells them, "Don't call me Naomi, call me Mara, because the Almighty has made my life very bitter." But Ruth doesn't dwell in bitterness. Instead, she takes action. As a widow with no income, she goes out to glean, to gather leftover grain in the fields after the harvesters. It was humble, backbreaking work, but it was legal provision for the poor and the foreigner in Israel's law. This is where Ruth encounters Boaz, a wealthy landowner, a man of character, and a relative of Naomi's late husband. Boaz notices Ruth, not for her beauty or charm, but for her reputation of loyalty. He had heard how she left her homeland to care for Naomi. He tells her, "May the Lord repay you for what you have done. May you be richly rewarded by the Lord, under whose wings you have come to take refuge." Boaz shows Ruth kindness, protection, and generosity. And Ruth, in her humility, responds with gratitude. Lesson 2 emerges here. Faithfulness opens doors to divine favor. Ruth didn't chase after opportunity or status. She simply worked faithfully in the place where God had put her. And that is where God's blessing began to unfold. Naomi, recognizing the kindness of Boaz and his potential role as a redeemer for their family, gives Ruth strategic advice. She instructs her to go to Boaz at night, after the harvest celebration, and to lay at his feet. Now, This was not a romantic gesture in the modern sense. It was a cultural symbol of requesting protection, provision, and redemption. Ruth obeys Naomi with dignity and boldness. When Boaz wakes and sees her, Ruth speaks directly. "Spread the corner of your garment over me, since you are a guardian redeemer of our family." This moment is filled with vulnerability. Ruth is taking a risk, socially, emotionally, and spiritually. But Boaz responds with honor. He praises her for her loyalty, not chasing after younger or wealthier men, and he promises to resolve the matter according to the law. Here we see another vital lesson. Faithfulness aligns with God's providence when combined with wise counsel. Ruth didn't navigate her journey alone. She listened to Naomi's wisdom and acted with courage. Sometimes our faithfulness is strengthened by the voices God places around us. Boaz, being a man of integrity, ensures the legal process is followed. He meets with the elders at the city gate, presenting the case for redeeming Naomi's land and marrying Ruth. Another relative has the first right of redemption, but declines. Boaz steps forward, fulfilling the role of kinsman redeemer. Ruth, the Moabite widow, becomes the wife of Boaz. Together, they have a son named Obed. Naomi, once bitter and empty, now holds a grandson in her arms. The women of Bethlehem rejoice, declaring that Naomi's life has been restored. But the story doesn't end there. Obed becomes the father of Jesse. Jesse becomes the father of David, Israel's greatest king. And generations later, from the line of David comes Jesus Christ, the Savior of the world. This is the ultimate lesson of Ruth's story. Faithfulness, even in the smallest acts, plays a role in God's eternal plan. Ruth could never have imagined that her decision to stay with Naomi, her humble work in the fields, or her bold request to Boaz would lead to her becoming part of the lineage of the Messiah. But that's what faithfulness does. It connects our present choices with God as greater purpose. So what can Ruth teach us about faithfulness and purpose? Let's break it down. 1. Faithfulness requires sacrifice. Ruth left everything familiar to follow God's calling. Sometimes our path to purpose means letting go of comfort. 2. Faithfulness opens the door to God's favor. Ruth didn't strive for recognition. She worked diligently, and God honored her. 3. Faithfulness works with wise counsel. Naomi's guidance shaped Ruth's steps. We, too, need mentors and voices of wisdom. 4. Faithfulness impacts generations. Ruth's story reminds us that our choices ripple far beyond our own lives. Your loyalty, your perseverance, your quiet acts of devotion could shape a future you'll never fully see. The book of Ruth is only 4 chapters long, yet it carries a message that resounds through eternity. It tells us that no matter our background, no matter our losses, no matter how insignificant we feel, God sees the faithful heart. He takes our small steps of loyalty and weaves them into his grand design. Ruth's story is not just about finding love with Boaz. It is about finding purpose in faithfulness. It is about discovering that when we cling to God and commit to his ways, our lives are never wasted. So the next time you feel overlooked, the next time you wonder if your quiet acts of loyalty matter, remember Ruth. Remember that faithfulness is never forgotten by God, and in his timing, he will reveal the greater purpose behind your obedience. Because like Ruth, you too can be part of a story far bigger than yourself, a story of redemption, hope, and divine purpose.